this not had this not happened today, in a soon normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. That won't happen at this point, in the foreseeable future anyway. So here you see the map of the area that the Hamas fighters were able to occupy in some degree or another on October 7th and 8th. They include 3 towns here, Sderot, Netivot, and Ofakim. All the rest of the smaller sites in here are kibbutzim and moshavim, and the area that's in the pinkish, that's the Gaza Strip itself, where 2.2 million Palestinian people live. Now, let's go way back a bit to try to put some context on this. In August, September of 2005, Israel pulled its military forces out of the Gaza Strip. Why, and also for settlements in the North and West Bank, we will talk about that. Why did Israel do this? The principal advisor to then Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon, said very clearly, the significance of the disengagement plan, that is pulling the Israeli military out of the Gaza Strip, is the freezing of the peace process. Disengagement supplies the amount of formaldehyde that is necessary so there will not be a political process with the Palestinians. So this is very important. Israel pulling its forces out of the Gaza Strip was meant to be a prelude to facilitating the annexation of the West Bank and also the separation politically and geographically of the Gaza Strip from the West Bank, so those 2 territories could never be united in a Palestinian state. In order to do this, Israel evacuated about 9,000 settlers that had established settlements in the Gaza Strip. They resisted it quite violently, and there's a whole internal Israeli story about that, which we won't get into. And so after Israel's pullout, the Gaza Strip looked like this. Israel established a border fence, which Hamas forces breached in several places. It established a no-go area, and it established not quite a free fire zone, but a zone in which if you wandered into it, you might get shot. So the Gaza Strip is surrounded in this way as an open-air prison. Now, in 2006, there were elections for the Palestinian Legislative Council. Palestinian Legislative Council was set up according to the Oslo Accords, the agreements between Israel and the PLO in 1993. Those accords never came to fruition, but nonetheless, there was this election, which all observers agree was a free and fair election, and Hamas won the election with a plurality of the popular vote, but a majority of the seats in the actual legislative council. You can see the numbers and the political groups here. We won't go into all of that detail. The point of the elections was people had previously primarily supported Fatah, the largest political party in the Palestine Liberation Organization. They turned away from Fatah for 2 reasons. One, the Oslo process did not achieve a Palestinian state. By this time, it was already pretty clear that that was not going to be happening. And 2, Fatah had become quite corrupt, and this was a protest against the corruption of the Palestinian Authority, in which Fatah is the largest force. So after the elections, Hamas and Fatah agreed to form a unity government, which never actually came into being. And consequently, the United States, Israel, the European Union, most Western countries said, we're not going to deal with Hamas because they don't support the Oslo process. They're not in favor of a 2-state solution, which, as I said at that point already, didn't look very likely to be happening. So there was all of this jockeying for about 1.5 years until the United States and Israel encouraged Fatah to try to undertake a coup d'etat and throw out, again, the democratically elected government led by Hamas. This was, as the best article on this happens to have been published weirdly in Vanity Fair, an attempted coup by Fatah that was preempted before it could happen. And what that resulted in was Hamas establishing its control over the Gaza Strip, whereas Fatah and the Palestinian Authority maintained control in the West Bank, and that's the status quo today. Israel and Egypt, supported by the United States and the EU, therefore imposed a siege on the Gaza Strip, in which they completely controlled the entry and exit of everything. Israel sought to, as they put it, put Gaza on a diet. That's to say, ensure that they could get 2,000 calories a day, which is the World Health Organization minimum for adults, but nothing more than that. And moreover, in addition to this siege, which has been tightened and loosened to various degrees over the time, there were several military operations, which Israel called mowing the lawn. That is to say, limited military operations against the Hamas and then later also the Islamic Jihad forces in the Gaza Strip in 2008, 2009, into 2012, in 2014, in 2021. What Israel is doing now is going to be very, very different than these operations. Israel is going to try to seize, at least temporarily, control of at least the northern Gaza Strip and to try to reorganize political life in the area. Now, while all this was going on, there was a change of government in Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu came to power in March of 2009. He had briefly been prime minister of Israel before in 1996, 1999, but he entered here a relatively long period in which he was the prime minister, as he is now, again, since December of 2022. And in yesterday's Haaretz, there was a very important and excellently researched article by Adam Raz, who explained that during the 14 years of Netanyahu's being in power, he tried to establish a modus vivendi with Hamas. And the idea was that keeping Hamas in power would weaken the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, maintain the separation of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and therefore block the formation of a Palestinian state. In other words, implementing the plan that Dov Weinglass, Ariel Sharon's advisor, articulated in 2005 on the eve of Israel withdrawing its forces from the Gaza Strip. And that meant that Israel allowed the government of Qatar to send sometimes as much as $30 million a month in cash so that it couldn't be traced. So some of it inevitably went to Hamas and not only the civilian population of the Gaza Strip, and basically kept the Hamas regime afloat. I mean, that didn't mean that they were totally aligned. I mean, there were these 4 military campaigns. There were rockets that Hamas and Islamic Jihad sent into Israel, and they were not exactly best friends, but there was an understanding of what the rules of the game were. And if Hamas breaks the rules, they get smacked down. And if Israel breaks the rules, then they get rocket barrages. But basically, both sides were playing a certain devil's game in this way. Meanwhile, the population of the Gaza Strip was totally devastated. So I won't go through all of these really distressing numbers, but just have a look while I'm speaking more broadly. What all of these distressing statistics amounted to is that the United Nations Trade and Development Agency declared that by 2020, they said that in 2018, the Gaza Strip would be uninhabitable. Well, it's after 2020, and the Gaza Strip is uninhabitable according to normal human standards. And that explains a lot of both why Hamas did what it did and why it conducted such ferocious and horrific massacres of civilians, which can't be accepted under any circumstances whatsoever, despite this horrific oppression that Palestinians has been subjected to. So here I just ran the legal argument for why Israel still occupies the Gaza Strip. I trust you'll believe me on that, and we won't have to get into all of that. If you like infographics rather than cold hard facts, as in the previous slide, you can see here what Gaza has been up to, with very high unemployment and food insecurity and repeated military incursions. And here's another infographic which looks more at the economic and demographic numbers and shows you that the livability of the Gaza Strip actually substantially decreased between 2012 and 2018, 2019, depending on what the figures, the year of the figures are. I don't have more recent figures than this, but since 2018, 2019, things have gotten considerably worse. So on all of these indicators, things are even worse than what the infographic is showing you here. Now, of course, people, ordinary people, try to organize and resist these circumstances. And one of the most important efforts to resist was the Great March of Return, which began in March of 2018 and was ended in December of 2019. And how did this begin, and what was it? Ahmed Abu Artima, a journalist not aligned with Hamas or Fatah or any political party, in response to former President Trump recognizing Israel's annexation of East Jerusalem and opening an American embassy there, which it's not yet fully operational, but it's in the planning stages, and Trump and others went there to inaugurate it in January of 2018. And Ahmed Abu Artima posted on Twitter that we should do something about it. So the bottom line, this is an invitation to all factions, trade unions, civil society institutions, and youth federations to take the initiative. In other words, this was not an initiative of Hamas or Fatah. This was an initiative of an engaged and well-known citizen calling on everybody to come together and have an unarmed demonstration on the border of the Gaza Strip and the state of Israel along that fence that Israel had built some years ago. And every Friday between March of 2018 and December 27th of 2019, demonstrations were held. And in the beginning, they were indeed entirely independent of Hamas, but Hamas ultimately succeeded in imposing itself, I think is the right word, on this very broad popular movement, and that they led it into not armed engagements with Israel, but violent engagements with Israel, which even increased the already fierce Israeli armed repression of these demonstrations. You can see the numbers of deaths at the various demonstration sites in the graphic here. What's important, though, even more than the number of deaths is the number of wounded, which you see here along this line in the blue. And that's because Israeli snipers intentionally shot at people's legs in order to disable them. And so there are a very large number of permanently crippled Palestinians as a result of this engagement. one of the high points of this series of demonstrations was the targeted assassination of Rozan al-Najjar by an Israeli sniper. And I bring this here because only a few days ago, there was a big public debate over who bombed the Al-Ahli hospital, in which some 470, perhaps more people were killed and many more wounded. And Israel claimed that it was due to the misfire of an Islamic Jihad rocket, and the Palestinian forces said that Israel had bombed the hospital. So I don't think we know yet exactly what happened there, but we do know that after the Israeli snipers targeted a medic, a young medic, Rozan al-Najjar, for assassination, they released a doctored video that purported to show that she was a Hamas operative and so forth, which she was not. She was a young woman, a patriotic young woman who had the training and decided that she would go out there and provide medical aid to people who were being shot at by the Israeli forces. And then after a while, it took a while, the New York Times and other media outlets did an investigation, and the New York Times concluded that she was, in fact, shot by an Israeli, and that she was unarmed, and no one near her was armed, and the shooting appeared there. The New York Times concluded the shooting appears to have been reckless at best and possibly a war crime for which no one has yet been published. So that conclusion came 6 months after the event. I don't know if it'll take 6 months or 6 weeks or how long it might take until we can determine what happened at the Ahli hospital, but that's just a word of caution to say, don't believe what you see at first glance. Let me conclude by saying this. A lot of people, when they saw that Hamas breached the barrier, occupied all this territory, celebrated what Hamas did. And it was a totally shocking and unexpected expression of Palestinian initiative and agency. No one believed that Hamas had the capacity to do this. But I don't think that, therefore, we ought to be celebrating this. There were horrific massacres of unarmed civilians at more than a dozen places. Really outrageous scenes. I won't. It's semi-pornographic to show you the pictures, so I won't. Hamas is not a liberatory agency. Hamas is, besides its armed units, a political party, a social movement with an extremely regressive ideology. They are misogynist, they are anti-queer, they have been ruling with an authoritarian mode in the Gaza Strip since 2006-07. They have repressed all dissent. There is no freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, or any other such freedoms in the Gaza Strip. So even though they confronted Israel, if you will, they are not going to be leading Palestinians to any kind of liberation. And I would argue that, in fact, they set back the day of liberation considerably by what they have done. And they brought enormous death and destruction on the civilian population of Gaza. So horrific as Israel's repression and oppression of the Palestinian people has been, I don't think what Hamas did was justified. And horrific as Hamas's attacks on civilians was on October 7th, I don't think that justifies the death and destruction that Israel has rained on the Palestinians of the Gaza Strip so far, and which is probably going to increase even more if they launch the ground invasion, which everyone is anticipating they will do in the coming days. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll be happy to engage you all in discussion.